We want to welcome Mr. Andrew Shorter to join us today, who is the director of the Coastal Carolina Regional Airport, and Ms. Leigh Cook, who is the business manager for the airport. Andy, I know you have a lot of information that you'd like to share with our viewers today, but perhaps a good place to start is to give everyone a little bit of background about the history of the New Bern Airport, Coastal Carolina Regional, how it came into existence, and what services you provide today at the airport.
Well, that's a good way to start because the airport does have an interesting history. It started in 1931, which was, of course, well before World War II. And I'd say majority of the airports across the nation came after World War II. Of course, they put those assets in place, and then communities took those over from the federal government. But there was enough foresight in this area that prior to World War II, there was an airport in its current location developed. So what and therefore it's kind of morphed itself through a couple different phases. It was there originally to provide air service for the community, whether it be for business or for travel.
Right.
And then it did go through the World War II period where it supported Marine Corps operations before Cherry Point was developed. And then after that, of course, shifted back to the air service, passenger air service, and business, leisure type air service. And that's basically what we do now. We have commercial air service, which normally when we talk about that, it's talk about moving passengers on the scheduled airlines. We also have cargo air service, and by that we talk about FedEx and UPS. FedEx has a large, about 40,000 square foot facility there, and then UPS uses more ramp operations. And then we also have the business aspect, where this is, to a large degree, the front door of this community. If someone's going to come to this area to develop a multi-million-dollar company, they're probably not going to drive in to do that. They're going to fly in to take their first couple looks around. And then, of course, we have flight training that we do there in light airplanes, and that is a nice feather in our cap that we are helping to advance the aviation cause into the future by training pilots there. So we have a nice mix of what we do at this airport. Some commercial service airports, once they get so big moving passengers on the large airlines, they can't do some of those other things, but we have a good blend of all of those.
And I also understand you have aircraft maintenance services as a part of that side of the airfield?
Yes, that is, and that most closely ties with the flight school. Planes that are doing commercial flight operations, teaching, training, have a little bit higher maintenance requirement. But that facility also does take care of the air carrier airplanes if they have minor problems that they can take care of, so we don't delay people's flights. And so it's light repair. There's not any major overhaul facilities on the airport, but of course we do have space where we can expand. If someone was looking to develop one of those here, we could provide them the space to do that.
You actually have a pretty large physical footprint in Craven County in terms of acreage and then the space that you occupy, do you not?
Yeah, it's about 732 acres, and it's more or less centrally located in Craven County. You know, Craven County has an interesting design, but we're, you know, kind of halfway between Cove City and Havelock on the long axis of the county. So it is a great asset to the community. As you know, there's 100 counties in the state. There's only 72 public airports in the state, and out of those 72, only 10 of them provide commercial air service, i.e., again, the large airlines, in our case, American Airlines and Delta Airlines. So out of 100 counties, there's only 10 that have commercial service airports. So I like to say, you know, we punch above our weight level a little bit in that respect, but that is a huge asset to this area and community.
Well, certainly from my travel experiences, I can't think of a more convenient location for an airport for an area of our size that travelers can fly out of, coming and going, than this. I mean, this is absolutely the most convenient airport that I've ever actually flown from. So.
Yeah, a lot of it, we've just done a study and where we look at our catchment area, and we consider the closest other 3 counties to Craven County to be our catchment area, Pamlico, Jones, and Carteret County. And within that catchment area, there's a little over 250,000 residents. And out of that, there's what flies in a year's time frame is almost 500,000 passengers. So we've done the study of whether they fly out of New Bern or the other either local airports or go all the way over to Raleigh. And what we found that is the closest areas, New Bern, Vanceboro, Pollocksville, we retain about 75% of the passengers. So 75% of the traveling public that's traveling on the major airlines will use the airport. The interesting thing, you go further out to Carteret County and it drops below 60%. So right now we have some efforts on to do some marketing because we really think a lot of that's just a top of mind thing. People don't think about it. Because what's closely tied to that same question is how much does it cost? Everyone knows it takes you about 2 hours and 15 minutes to 2 hours and a half to get to Raleigh. That's a time sink. Certainly
Sure.
if you're traveling for business, you need to factor that in. But when you look at the cost difference between flying out of those two airports, it is only $52 difference. Everyone has their example of it being a few $100s difference, but depending on when you're looking for your ticket, on average it's $52. So for everyone that has that $300 difference example, it means that there's actually sometimes it's cheaper to fly out of New Bern. So we just want people to make sure, like I said, those folks in Carteret are literally driving past the airport to go to Raleigh. Make sure, of course, they're aware of it so they can make those best decision as it meets their budget and time. Certainly $52, once you take into account driving to Raleigh and then paying the higher parking rates that they have there, that's really a wash without even factoring in your own personal time that it takes you to do that.
Absolutely. So with the flights you have going to Charlotte and Atlanta, what's the total number of flights that we offer here locally every day?
This time of year, we're cyclical, but we're not as cyclical as people would think. Summer is our high season, then of course we hit Christmas, Thanksgiving, those holiday peaks within the off season,
Right.
that's considered here. But it's not a huge wave that where we ramp up to a lot more operations in summer. But right now, we have 8 commercial flights a day, and 3 of those are originators, meaning that they leave here first thing in the morning. Then there's the couple turns in the middle, and then we have 3 terminators that come in here at night, obviously, that become those originators the next day. So that is a nice mix. About every 2 to 2.5 hours, you can get a flight out of the airport during the day. And with the connections, you mentioned American Airlines, Delta Airlines. American Airlines goes to Charlotte, of course. Generally, it's considered, depending on how the numbers fall, the 6th busiest airport in the country. And for airports, busy is good because it means there's more connections to more destinations. And then Atlanta is the busiest airport in the world. So you can, if you get to Atlanta, you can get to anywhere in the world.
So essentially, from New Bern, you can go anywhere you want to any destination, and the cost price factor is very dependent on how you construct that ticket and make your reservations ahead of time.
Yes, that's why we like to even say that it is close, convenient, connected. People love to come into our airport and just say the ease of it is just so great for them. So we are proud to have that and offer that right here in New Bern. And so that's exciting to give to everyone that would like to travel.
And what are the numbers that you look at in terms of annual enplanements and ticketed passengers that depart on the commercial side?
Yeah, enplanements is a little bit of a specky side of how the airlines measure things and the FAA measures things. What I like to say is we serve about 250,000 passengers a year. So that counts for them leaving and who's coming in.
Right.
We're down a little bit from our peak a few years ago. There's within the airline industry, there's a little bit of turbulence right now with pilots, the number of pilots and things, and they're transitioning to different aircraft. So we do not have as many seats available to us as we have had in the past, but the load factors have gone up. So you might say that they made a good business decision, that they're better utilizing what we do have. But we certainly think that we have pent-up demand here, and that we can, as soon as they can get back to give us, our high water mark was 11 flights a day. So if they could get back to give us those few extra flights a day, confident that we could fill them. But that's why, back to the ticket price thing, it's so important to book your ticket at the proper time. You really don't want to look 90 days prior, any more than 90 days prior, because the airlines just put a price out there. They haven't really studied what the market's doing at that point. But within 90 days, they start looking at the market, and then probably all the way down to 21 days. You start going anywhere inside of 21 days, then it's a pure economics, supply and demand factor where the elasticity of supply will force the price up.
What can you tell our viewers about the type of aircraft that they would be flying on in and out of New Bern, and what changes there may be in the future going forward?
Right, well, that's a very good question right now. And for instance, this summer, we have all jet service out of New Bern. And that's not always been the case here in New Bern because of the stage lengths that we fly to Charlotte is not that long. And quite frankly, flying it in a jet, it doesn't get you there much faster. But the airlines have realized it's a public perception thing, it's a comfort thing, and the jet is more comfortable to fly in, a little less noisy. So that's what all of our flights are right now, probably up through September. We'll see the prop planes come in a little bit more, but then by next summer, there will not be any more prop planes to be flown in and out of here. Along with that change, what the airlines call upgauging, no one is making a 50-seat airplane anymore because the airlines are refusing to buy 50-seat airplanes anymore. So the smallest plane that we'll see is a 76-seat airplane, and so it'll be between 76 and 90 seats. And those are a little bit more comfortable as well. They're a little bit bigger than the 50-seaters. But that's just a change in the industry. Through the crunch in the 08, 09 time frame, fuel was high, economy was bad. But those 50-seat airplanes weren't hitting the right numbers to make money, so they've decided to upgauge to these larger airplanes for the future.
With the larger airplanes that you're anticipating in the future, would we hopefully keep the same number of flights on a daily scheduled basis?
Yeah, quite frankly, that's a little bit of the $64,000 question, and every time I engage with the airlines, that's what I tell them I'm worried about, because frequency has a quality all its own to an airport this size. And they are aware of that. And like I said, I believe that we have the pent-up demand where if they replace every one of our 50 seats with a 76 seat, the same schedule we're running, we will fill those up. So right now there's no indication that we would pare back anything less than what we have now. So we'll see. So it may work out, the timing of it work out just perfectly where I said they've drawn back. So when we move forward, we'll move forward back to the high water mark of available seats that we had a few years back, but it still may be the 8 or 9 flights versus the 10 or 11 flights a day.
Right. And you mentioned the seasonality of some travelers throughout the country. What your busiest time of the year, is that the holiday period or is it summertime?
Summertime really is, if you look at, like I said, it's not a huge bump in the graph, but summertime is where we're the busiest. And right now, for instance, the pre-bookings through the end of this month and into next month is up in the mid 90%. So through the middle of August already, those seats are booked up to over 90%, what they call load factor, number of people in the plane versus the number of seats there, which is a very high number. On average, the nationwide load factor average is about 84%. So the advanced bookings were 10% above that already for this summer.
That's great. That's great. Can you talk a little bit about the amenities and the services that are available at the terminal and on the airport itself?
Yeah, well, one exciting thing that just actually even recently opened in May is Triple Play Oasis. We now have a restaurant and bar right there at the airport, which is exciting. We're seeing a lot of people coming in for that, and it's just nice to see that activity where they can go in and grab a sandwich, grab a cup of coffee, before they get on to their destination of where they're going. And we're seeing a lot of positive comments on how much they're enjoying that being there.
Right. And you have plenty of on-site parking and also rental car services are available, is that correct?
Yes, sir, we do. Absolutely.
We have 4 or 5 how many rental car companies do you actually have that are located on the airport?
We have Avis, Budget, Hertz, National Alamo, and Enterprise are all located right there in our facility.
Okay, great.
An interesting thing about that, some people that are not even using the air side of the airport will come and get their rental car there as well. Again, it's just another location that they have available to them to pick up a rental car, so that's great. We have a car service as well, it's not really a taxi. New Bern, for whatever reason, doesn't have a lot of taxi companies in it, but we have a nice car service that has gotten great comments since we just changed that out a little less than a year ago. And they will take anybody anywhere they need to go, either coming
And that's
to
A
or
to
leaving
Z
there.
transportation.
Right. And some of the hotels provide a shuttle service as well, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, great. I know you want to talk about long-range planning and the enhancements for the airport. But maybe for our viewers, how is an airport supported financially? How do you pay for your operations? How do you pay for the improvements and that sort of thing? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, and where a lot of people think of airports as municipal assets. And we do run a lot like a public utility, but we were actually a small private business. That's how we run.
Right.
We make all our money on the airport to cover our O&M, our operations and maintenance year in, year out. We do get occasionally large grants from either the state or the federal government to work on large capital projects, keeping the runways in shape, up to safety standards and those things. But year in, year out, we are making the money at the airport to roll back into the airport. So I think that's something great that folks in the community should understand. And that's a byproduct of being that commercial service airport. There are a number of those 72 public airports in the state that don't have commercial service airports that do make enough money to run themselves, but for the most part, a lot of those are reliant on local municipal funds to help them run. So by virtue of the fact that we have this commercial service there and we can make money, we do charge for parking. That's a standard thing with any airport, as anybody knows. But we use that money to keep that airport running to then provide all these fantastic things that we talked about before that the airport does. And from that, maybe go into a little bit of the economic impact of the airport. So again, this self-funding entity within the community gives up about $179 million a year economic impact. That was from a 2016 study that we just did. And about 3.3 million of that is direct state and local tax receipts. So out of that $179 million economic impact, which is the whole number, what is actually going into the municipality's coffers is about $3.3 million. Across the country, that is about across the state, that's about $900 million.
Right.
So recently, the North Carolina General Assembly kind of realized that and was able to understand that the airports statewide, there was a funding gap between what we were getting from the federal government and what the state was supplying us. And so they made a move in just this last session in the budget to give some of that money, effectively use some of those tax receipts to give back to the airport to let them cover some of this gap in requirements for infrastructure needs against what we were getting from the federal government. So that's been a great win for the airports.
That's great information, Andy. What is your current staffing level for the airport itself to maintain the facility? What's your structure there?
Well, we have 5 full-time employees, and then it's hard to believe that the rest are part-time, and we have a total of about 60 employees that work, which includes, our part-time staff, and then also the LEOs that are out there, the law enforcement officers that help
for security.
Absolutely, for our security out there.
We understand that you've gotten some monies recently that are targeted for particular improvements and enhancements on the airport. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I will, but just to dovetail on what Leanne said about that is who works for the airport. And of course, at the airport, and the way a lot of people think about the airport is the airline. They have their own staff, obviously, that works at the airport. The restaurant has their own staff. So those are actually tenants of ours.
Right.
So that airport staff, we control the heart of the business, but then we do lease out space. And again, that's how we remain self-sufficient with the monies that we do for that. And we try to help passengers, particularly on the commercial side, if they have problems and the airlines may or may not be available because they're working a flight. So we try to mix in there a little bit, but I know sometimes people are frustrated when their bag didn't show up and they go to the counter and there's nobody there yet. And of course, we can't really go in the back and get a bag. That's their secured area. So there's a little bit of, it's not planned friction, but there becomes a little bit of friction for that. And we try to help as much as we can. And we understand customer service is very important. So do the airlines. But sometimes they're just limited for a period of time before they can come back and help the customer. So Leanne's very good about coming up with different ways to try to make that work better. And of course, we're big proponents of continuous improvement, and we'll continue to do those kinds of things on the customer service side, particularly or mainly as it relates to the commercial air service. Now, to the plans and going forward, what people consider at EWN as the new terminal is actually 20 years old. And of course, the planning for that probably started a little bit before that. So what the FAA likes you to do is have what they call a master plan on the shelf for the next 20 years. So that's what we're looking at now. So if you kind of blend the years a little bit, this would be kind of our 2040 plan, right. 2020 to 2040. So what we do some forecasting, and we do some inventory of what we have now and what we think we're going to have for business and passengers, kind of blend those together and then see how our facilities either are adequate or are falling short. And we're in the middle of that process, iterating those two things right now. But from what we've seen, the forecast, there's a slight, there is an increase in commercial air service that'll be happening in those 20 years. So we do need to expand the terminal a little bit. We're actually already above our peak hour throughput for the square footage we have.
Right.
So I think we're going to start moving on that sooner than later, actually almost in stream of finishing up this master plan, which is about a 2-year effort, because our previous plan did show some expansion on the airport on the terminal side, because of course when they built it, they actually had intended it to be a little bit bigger, but budget constraints made it not quite as big. So we're going to be able to move on that a lot quicker than probably what doing this full planning process will allow. But by the time we're finished with this full planning process, we'll have a good idea of what we need for the next 20 years, and then we'll move on that sequentially as time and money permit.
You mentioned that there are 72 airports across North Carolina and only 10 provide commercial service. Is that correct?
Correct. 72 public airports.
Public airports.
There's grass strips and privates that people maintain themselves, but publicly maintained.
And New Bern has an active control tower. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so we have all-weather operations, flight operations with instrumentation and that sort of thing coordinated through the control tower. Do all of those other 10 airports have towers or not?
Yeah, interesting. There's only 9 control towers in the state. So you do the math. It's like, well, shoot. There's 10 commercial service airports, but actually there's a couple of just general aviation airports that have towers. So yes, less than all of the commercial service airports have towers.
Do our neighboring airports to the north and the south, do they have control towers active?
Jacksonville and Greenville do not. Jacksonville is getting one next year. They're starting to lay the groundwork for that this year. Right. So that will bring up in the state the number of 10. And the interesting piece of that, and it may be a little bit too specky for a lot, but 5 of those are run by the FAA, staffed by the FAA, and currently right now 4, which will be another 5, are what they call contract towers. So that's very important within the federal budget. That a few years ago, sequestration, they tried to pull out the funding for those, but then we had such great support with our state federal legislators that we were able to keep that funding in there to keep the tower operating. It's really important for us, our proximity to Cherry Point with fast jet traffic flying around, to be able to separate those two. So it is once again, a great asset for this community to have that, to make this airport just that much safer and more efficient, really.
Great. What type of aircraft storage facilities do you have aboard the airport at this time? For folks that own an airplane, where they can keep it, what do you have available?
Yeah, well, we currently have actually 68 hangars at the airport, and they are, broken down to, we have T hangars, some box hangars, and some corporate hangars. And so those are, located there where we even have right now, there's some available T hangars. In fact, if anyone is interested in even, if they have a plane and they're interested in one, we would love them to call to the airport, and they can call and talk to me, and we would love to get them into one of our hangars.
Which that is an exception to the norm. Usually we have what can be sometimes a long waiting list to get into hangars. We have 82 aircraft based on the airfield. Some of those, like she said, are box or corporate hangars. There's multiple airplanes in one hangar. So we mostly have enough to hangar all the airplanes on the airfield. And right now we're looking at studying. We have some requests from folks, wanting additional hangar space because the type we have available may not be the type that they're looking for. So the airport authority right now is researching possibly building some additional hangars. Because once again, this forecasting that we did with this master plan does show a requirement for more as we go through the future.
And do any of your flight operations include military aircraft actually flying into the airport or out of the airport at all?
They do. We have probably last year close to 35,000 operations, and that's logged primarily when the tower is in operation. So we probably really have 40 to 50,000. The tower's only open from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. And actually, a lot of the military flights, as people that live around there know, that sometimes will happen after 10 p.m. Military is very good about not overusing a facility. They realize that their noise profile is sometimes higher than what the commercial traffic gives. But while we don't have any military base there, of course, we do have them use the facility. And then across the state, that resonates as well. A lot of the more or less or more so, the New River aircraft, the rotary wing, tilt rotor aircraft, tend to use the small airports around the area. And the state takes that into account. Again, when I said the General Assembly is understanding the gaps and requirements for infrastructure in the airports, they understand that supports the military as well. So we do that. There's probably, out of that 35,000 we have a year, there's a couple of thousand of those are military ops for sure.
Okay. You mentioned possible changes in terms of pilot shortages and pilot staffing and the aircraft that are newer aircraft that are coming online. Is there anything else that our viewers could anticipate that you're looking at that's going to be coming in the next few years in terms of the aviation industry and flying in general?
What a lot of people may know and have heard about is the drone piece.
Right.
The FAA has they were playing catch up in a lot of ways to the drone piece, but drones don't necessarily mix very well with whether general aviation, military, or commercial traffic. But we do have procedures in place, and most people that have these drones now understand that if they're within 5 miles of an airport, they need to call and coordinate operations with either the airport management or the tower. So I do see that phenomena growing. Probably people that use drones commercially would tend to go to less busy airports. That just makes their coordination that much easier. But of course, we could see that as well. The other thing, I think, we have a couple hundred acres that is available for development, both aeronautical and what we call non-aeronautical. And we just qualified a site last year as part of the Smart Sites program with Electricities. Right. 23 and a half acres that's available for non-aeronautical development right now. So we're looking at it both ways to, once again, we talked about the location of the airport being kind of midway in Craven County. So the business park is further out towards the west, and then of course you have Havelock on the other end. So that again leaves the airport in a nice middle position. We have good access to Highway 70 to promote that type of development. As the F-35 program progresses down at Cherry Point, some of the things that they'll need to do, they may need aeronautical development where they have access to the runway for some kind of fast delivery of parts under the contract itself. So we have that space available. So as we move forward, we talked about the terminal expanding a little bit. We're looking at the length and strength of the runway to make sure that's adequate for the future. But then the other piece would be this more commercial development. And that dovetails into with what the county economic developers from Craven County, Lenore County, and Wayne County have gotten together to establish an aerospace corridor basically on Highway 70 from Havelock, effectively in Craven County, to Seymour Johnson in Wayne County. Of course, in the middle of that is Kinston Regional Jetport that already has a large maintenance, repair, overhaul facility, Spirit Aviation, that builds Airbus parts. So already within that corridor, and the reason that they've gotten traction on that is there are more aviation / aerospace contractors congregated between those two ends already. So we think promoting that will help draw them even larger population of those types of businesses here.
In terms of the layout of the airport, you have two runways. The main runway, the longest runway, is close to 6,500 feet in length, and you have a crosswind that's about 4,000 feet. Your commercial operations and some of your freight operations are on the south side or one side, and then the other side is multi-purpose at this time?
Yeah, well, that's what the airport's nicely bifurcated to where the commercial, like you said, cargo traffic is on the really more southern side. We're not really divided exactly along the cardinal magnetic headings. And then on that north side is where the general or business aviation is. So on the one side, you have the commercial, business, and leisure travelers. About 50-50 is what we do if you average it out during the year. Then on the other side, the business travelers, the general aviation travelers, that is, again, the front door to this area as far as business development. Those developers are using that, and it's a great general aviation terminal run by Tidewater Aviation that do a fabulous job servicing those sometimes very large jet aircraft that come in from, to be honest, some of them overseas.
Right. Understand. Is there any other closing thoughts you have about the airport? We want to make sure that folks understand that you need to use the local airport in order to support it and sustain its continued growth. Do you have any thoughts on that, Ian?
Well, I'll say one last thing and then let Leanne put her finishing touch on it. What we do want people to understand, and the commercial side, of course, is connected to the Department of Homeland Security and the Transportation Security Administration. So everyone knows when you're boarding flights, you're subjected to search by them. Well, the great news is we just got a new body scanner. They've had these at large airports for a long time, but they were a big piece of equipment. It's gotten to the point where they could shrink that technology, and now we have room for it, and we have one of those scanners here. And what's important about it to people is that if you have a replacement, name your joint, something in your body that's metal or metallic, you can use that machine and then not be subjected to enhanced screening afterwards. So that is a great thing for this area. And once again, the close, convenient, connected, that nails the convenient part right there. So you're parking close, it's easy to get in, and now you have the same TSA screening options available to you that you do at the large airports.
And the great thing about this airport, the parking is right in front of where it needs to be. It's close. And unlike having outlying parking that you have at larger airports where you then got to take a shuttle or something, you are right there in front of the terminal where you want to be and where you need to be. So
that's right.
Yeah, we just want to, of course, encourage the public to come to our airport. One thing that we're going to be having, actually, a new website. It is flyewn.com. We are really wanting to make sure that we kind of get that EWN, the airport code in there, so people, when they are booking their flights, when they go online, they will put in, usually you even have to put either New Bern or EWN, and so we're really trying to emphasize that EWN part. So you will see that around the area right now. In fact, we have a new billboard right there, right outside, right by the Harley Davidson, and we're excited to try to get different people, as Andy had mentioned earlier, from Carteret County that may be just passing by, that they can come right here and fly right out of Coastal Carolina Regional Airport. So again, we just want to emphasize, like we've said, that it's close, convenient, connected. Right here. So we, again, appreciate everybody coming. We have two exceptional airlines, Delta and American. And so, again, we just appreciate you using our airport, and flyewn.com.
Well, we want to thank Andy and Leanne for joining us today, and we hope that everyone will remember that New Bern, Coastal Carolina Regional Airport, is your flight destination connection. Thanks for being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
All right.